Hi, I'm Bonnie Kimke, and this is Quilting on a Thread. Today I'll be covering the basics, the essentials, if you will, of ruler quilting, specifically on a frame. I'll be on the Cutie Breeze using a Little Rebel. Now let's just consider the Little Rebel a mid-arm on the frame. The basic details will be the same whether you're running a quilting machine, a long arm or mid-arm, on your frame, or you're running a domestic on your frame. I'll point out those areas where things will be different, and those things are going to be in the tools that you choose to use. There are two things that you should have on your machine before attempting to do ruler quilting. That's going to be a ruler table or a ruler base, and you'll need that whether you're on a quilting machine or you're on a domestic. You're also going to need a ruler foot, and you're going to need the ruler foot appropriate to your domestic machine or appropriate to your long arm, mid arm. You'll also need a third item, and this is most essential. You're going to need the proper rulers for your machine, and we're going to get into that in detail. So let's talk about these essentials before we get going. A ruler base is different than an extension table. So if you have a domestic, you probably have an extension table with your domestic. And if you're working on a table, that extension table will be fine for ruler quilting. However, once you put that domestic on a frame, that extension table is too large. Most domestic machines will require an aftermarket ruler table, and you can get that from a company like So Steady. Every long arm or mid arm that I'm aware of has an OEM manufactured accessory called either a ruler table or a ruler base, and you're going to need the one appropriate for your long arm, mid arm machine. Since this is a beginnings video, let me stress that a hopping foot and a ruler foot are not the same thing. If you have a domestic, your hopping foot probably has a little spring area and an arm, and that arm rests on your needle screw. And the purpose of this mechanism is to lift the hopping foot up and down, and that is essential for most free motion quilting. However, that foot does not have the lip of a ruler foot. The ruler foot for most domestics is an optional foot, and it often has to be purchased from an alternative source like So Steady, Madam So, and others. If your domestic has an OEM manufactured ruler foot, my advice is use that ruler foot. It may be more expensive, but you're guaranteed to have a better result with that foot than with an alternative source foot. If you have the Little Rebel, a long arm or mid arm, your machine probably came with the hopping foot pre-installed, and you may have had a ruler foot delivered with your kit. If you did, count yourself lucky, because it's been my experience that the ruler feet are not inexpensive. Let's talk about the hopping foot. It's really critical to understand that the hopping foot on your mid arm, long arm, your Little Rebel, it's more shallow than the ruler foot, and so it's typically not a good idea to use the hopping foot in the place of a ruler foot. I've known of some people who have done this, and it might work out just fine for them. However, there's a real risk in using the hopping foot instead of a ruler foot that a ruler may pop up and go up over the edge of your hopping foot, and that could cause a needle crash, which would damage your ruler for certain, but may also damage your machine itself. You could go out of timing or even worse. I would encourage you to use an actual ruler foot. Now, for rulers, domestic machines are classified as either low shank or high shank, and there's some variations on the shank. For instance, you might run across a high shank special, but for the ruler work, all we're concerned about is that you have a low shank machine or a high shank machine. The shank is essentially the distance between the screw that holds your presser foot in place and the needle plate itself. A low shank machine has approximately a half an inch between that needle screw and the needle plate. Low shank rulers are essentially 1/8 of an inch thick. A high shank machine has an inch or more between that needle screw and the needle plate. And high shank rulers are generally 1/4 of an inch thick. Whether you have a little rebel, a mid-arm, or a long arm, you'll consider your machine a long arm machine. And long arm rulers are generally 1/4 of an inch thick or a smidge more. Low shank machines can only use low shank rulers. High shank machines can use rulers marketed as high shank rulers, and most rulers marketed as long arm rulers. Sometimes long arm rulers are thicker than the 1/4 of an inch marketing value. A thicker long arm ruler may not clear the back of your high shank machine, so you want to be careful about using long arm rulers if you haven't verified that it's a 1/4 of an inch. Long arm machines and mid arm machines, including the little rebel, can use both high shank rulers and long arm rulers, and you shouldn't have any problem using either ruler on your machine. So, as a beginner, what ruler should you start with? Well, I recommend a straight ruler. You can do a lot of things with a straight ruler. Another ruler that's a great ruler for a beginner is a 4-in-1. And by a 4-in-1, it usually has a right angle, it has a nice smooth curve, it has a straight edge, and in this case, this has a gutter, but it's dual purpose gutter. It's got the markings for a ditch gutter, but it's also got the depth of your entire ruler foot. So that can be handy in learning how to visualize where your ruler foot is going on your work. And the other thing that a 4-in-1 will usually have is what we call a clamshell. There's a lot that you can do with this ruler and make some very, very interesting designs on your work. It's also a good idea to have a set of rulers that has multiple curves in it, and they're usually sold as one product. This is from Good Measures. It's an Amanda Murphy ruler, and it has a straight edge and a 10-inch arc. It has a centerpiece that has 4 different sized arcs, and then it has the other edge has 2 more arcs. And there's a lot that you can do with this set of rulers with curves and arcs, the 4-in-1, and a straight edge. There is a multitude of designs that you can do with just those 3 rulers in your arsenal. So in a moment, I'm going to cut away, show you a different view. You're going to be looking down on my work. I'm going to show you some work that I've done. And I'm going to show you how to use those rulers that I just suggested to you to create some interesting designs. Big disclaimer here. The quilt that we're using is a pattern that I found in the Quilters Playground. What's the Quilters Playground? Well, the Quilters Playground is Grace Company's free bi-weekly lessons. They really go in depth in a lot of various topics, and it's something you should think about checking out. I'm going to have the link to that in my description on this video, so definitely check it out. So I've rearranged my camera so that we're looking down on my stitch area. These are the patterns that I'm going to try to show you how to do today, and I'm going to do those patterns with the set of the three rulers that I spoke about. So hopefully that'll make it a little clearer for you how to do this. So the rulers I'm going to be using is this portion of that Good Measures 3-piece set. That's the first ruler I'll be using. The second ruler I'll be using is the Baby Lock straight ruler with the 2 gutters. The biggest thing about these gutter rulers is that you put the ruler's gutter tabs on the line you're trying to stitch on, and that's going to place your ruler foot being dissected by that line, which means your needle is going to stitch along that line. That's what the gutter pieces are for, the gutter tabs are for. So we're going to start out with the arc in order to make these 2 arcs on this square, but we'll be making them on a square just like it over on the other side. But before I get to that, I want to discuss how we use the markings on this ruler, because you'll see there's a lot of nice markings. these lines almost sit exactly on the square. And that allows me to then come in here and slide forward. This line is in the center. It's dissecting the two squares so that the high point of my arc will be in the center. And so what I have to do is I have to come over here and decide where exactly to place my ruler to get that arc. So if you look closely, you can see that my stitch line is right on the edge of this ruler. If I were to stitch now, that's not where the stitch would be. The stitch would be a quarter off of this ruler because the size of your ruler foot is 1/2 of an inch. So you need to have a 1/4 inch offset to get the needle where you want to put it. So if I line this up using the guidelines that I have, I'm going to be off. So I need to move this in 1/4 of an inch. And that would give me the stitch line that I want to use. Now there's another thing to keep in mind about the rulers. It's not about pressing down as hard as you can. If you do that, you're not going to be able to control the machine or the ruler. You want to press the ruler firmly down, and what I do is I use 2 or 3 fingers to hold the ruler firmly in place. You just want enough pressure. You're somewhat steady. Now the next thing I do is I take my 2 small fingers, my ring finger and my pinky finger, and I put the ring finger up against the ruler and my pinky finger out a little bit to create kind of a tripod, if you will. My thumb is here forward. These are the fingers that have the most pressure, even though my thumb is not pressing hard. These are the fingers that will steady this ruler. These 2 fingers will hold the ruler in place so that it doesn't bounce. I've moved this over to this block that we're going to stitch. It's a mirror image of the block I was just showing you. And I want to point out that I've already used my straight ruler to stitch in the ditch around all of these squares. It's something I always do when I'm ruler working. If I have squares to work on, I will stitch in the ditch. That also helps to keep the back still looking pristine, and it's usually not going to interfere with the work you're doing. You're stitched in the ditch to hold things in place. So now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to line this one up. So I'm going to use this stitch line and this stitch line only to place my ruler. I've already determined that this is probably, midway between these 2 markings is probably where I need to be. Drop my needle, raise my needle, because now I want to pull my thread up. So that means I have to pull away, pull that thread, get the thread up, get both the upper and lower thread out of my way, come back over here, drop my needle down. Now that's no different than anything else you've ever done as far as getting your needle down, with the exception of you have a ruler that you're trying not to move. Don't worry if you moved your ruler. You just come back up with the needle down, come back up, put your ruler in place, and be visual. And so I just have to adjust the bottom end and make sure that I'm in place. I've been quilting a long time. I know what a 1/4 inch looks like. If you are having a problem with the 1/4 inch and don't know for sure that you're at the bottom lined up with a 1/4 inch, I'm going to show you a trick. This is not an essential tool. This happens to be the Omni Grid. It comes in varying lengths. The key element of this ruler is that it's 1/2 of an inch wide with a strong line down the center. This provides a very good 1/4 inch measurement on either side of the center line. This makes it useful in determining if your ruler is lined up to give you the desired stitch line. We're going to go ahead and stitch. Keep in mind that now I have to see about managing that thread. So to do that, that's one of the reasons why I needle down, but I'm going to go ahead and needle down a couple of times to give myself a little bit of a lock. I don't want these threads coming into my work, because then I'll have a mess underneath. I go ahead and let it stitch a couple of times. That helps lock stitch. Now I need to readjust my ruler. So I again use all the guidelines. So here we go. And now you'll see that I have to hold the ruler a little bit differently, but I still have 2 fingers off of the ruler to help steady it. I'm not pressing that ruler in as if I'm trying to kill anything. I'm holding that ruler steady so that it doesn't move while I guide the ruler foot along. It's important to keep your fingers out of the way of the shaft coming up and down, because if you hold too close, that shaft does come up and down. You could get nipped by that. It can bounce on you, so let's not do that. Let's go ahead and start. Let it hit a few stitches and stop. Notice I don't have to rush. I can go very fast or I can go very slow. I have stitch regulation on my little Rebel running. If you are manual, the speed that you drive your machine is going to be more critical. So we're going to line up. Now we've got 3 of those arcs in, and I'm on the way to my final arc. Okay, now I'm done. So I'm going to go ahead and needle up, needle down a few times. I want to lock those stitches in place. I'm now going to go pull off and get my bobbin thread up. So let's go ahead and lay down that second arc. So we're going to do a 1/2 of an inch. We're about to echo the arcs inside of the arcs we have previously stitched down. We no longer have a fixed visual for our starting and stopping points. Because this is a square and our starting and stopping points are to be on the diagonal lines, one would be between the 2 triangles, so we have a physical line. The other end of our arc, we have to imagine or draw that in. We use the markings on the ruler to adjust the stitch lines according to our desired echo. And we use the diagonal marks on the quilt physical or imaginary for our start-stop points. All right, we're going to do the crosshairs in the center of the square, but we're going to stop and end on that inner arc. So what I would do, and this is what I generally do, is I take my center point and I go ahead and mark a point and mark a point. I'm using a water-soluble pencil here. Then I'm going to find the center point of this side and I'm going to mark the point and mark the point. So we'll start on one arc and end on the other. And then we'll do all of our other lines the same way. So let's do the side line first. So how we do that is, so we do that, we get on that line, drop the needle, raise the needle, come back and drop the needle in exactly the same spot as closely as we can get it. Go up and down a few times to lock that stitch in place. Bring back the ruler, get it on our gutter marking, keep it as level as we can, and we're going to just stitch to this point and then we're going to terminate. So we're going to let that stitch a few times and we'll stop. Then we'll raise, come off, come back, pick up that thread. So we have the bobbin thread we're going to cut off. All right, so here's that square finished out. And if we go back and look at the first square, you can see they both look very, very similar. So I hope there was enough information to help you get started using rulers. I hope to see you again here on Quilting on a Thread. Bye-bye now.